Welcome to Harbinger Week, where I'll be discussing the unreleased Harbingers and theorizing on their potential backgrounds, power sets, and other neat details. Today, we'll be diving into the chivalrous yet mysterious faceless Harbinger, Il Capitano, the Captain. Disclaimer: this video is not indicative of anything final in the game. Oh, and for those that want something nice to drink for the hot weather, get your gamer subs at 10% off with the code ASTER, and get these really questionable waifu cups. Anyway, who is Capitano? Capitano is a harbinger renowned by both his fellow associates and subordinates as being an honorable and powerful individual. His current constellation and rank are unknown, but speculations bring the fascinating theory that Capitano is the first-ranking Fatui harbinger just under Piero. This is because both Child and Wanderer's voice signs position Capitano between Piero and Totore and before Columbina. This is further supported with Pulcinella, the fifth of the harbingers, being the appropriate distance away from the second and third harbinger, and Sandrone being after Pulcinella. This would make Piero a kind of overseeing director of the Harbingers, and the official ranking starting with Capitano, which, trust me, already has its fair share of leaks and theories, so I suggest watching Sudakon 1-4's and Ashikai's videos on the subjects since I'm only focusing on Capitano for today. Capitano was first mentioned by Victor in the commission Tales of Winter, where Victor essentially says that while he was currently running an errand for Senora, he would pretty much prefer to work under Capitano instead. Capitano, compared to the other harbingers we've seen, is actually much more respected than he is feared by his subordinates. His reputation is much more pleasant than that of Scaramouche, Dottore, and Senora, who are actively feared and revered. He is known as righteous, cordial, and nevertheless pleasant even to those that are supposed to be his enemies. Vargas notes about Capitano is that he was pretty helpful during their excursion. He also speaks of honor regarding Senora's death, saying that while Senora's methods tarnished her honor, her sacrifice is still a great pity. He's also the only one to call her by her real name, a level of respect that shouldn't be ignored. Tartaglia's voice line about him states that he's very much eager to earn the recognition of Capitano, stating that because of the disparity between their ranks, Capitano hasn't as much glanced his way. However, Wanderer warns the traveler that while Capitano is known as brave, fearless, and nigh invincible, that kind of absolute righteousness should be seen as a potential hazard and a latent danger, which would actually tie in well with Capitano's real-life inspirations. Much like all the other harbingers, Capitano is based off of the Commedia dell'Arte, a form of Italian theater that relies on masked actors and actresses improvising to create a lazzo or a witty joke and screenplay. Capitano is an exaggerated form of a braggart Spaniard who likes to comment that he is a renowned captain with numerous achievements, but is nothing short of an imbecile. Capitano of the Commedia comes from two literary sources according to Wikipedia and Britannica. One is Plautus's Miles Gloriosus, which talks about the, oh my god, Pyrgo Polynices, I'm so sorry about the pronunciation, and Terence's The Eunuchus. I wouldn't be against Gloriosus being a potential real name for Capitano, but that entirely depends on what region he's from, which we'll get to later. Bilich's Captain's Treasure, a Commedia, actually sheds light on this characterization quite well. In this play, Arlecchino arrives with nothing to his name and is brought in by Capitano as a lowly servant. Columbina is quick to ridicule him, and to save face, Arlecchino says that Capitano has found a magnificent treasure. The story extends much farther, but I find this line of Arlecchino about Capitano summarizing the captain's character really well. I quote, "2 weeks we've gone on the road with hardly a good meal or a roof over our heads. The Capitano is less for fighting than boasting of deeds he's never done over a strong drink." Which actually heavily contradicts Genshin's Capitano, who doesn't seem to be as much of a braggart versus his Commedia counterpart. If anything, he seems to be a silent figure in the background while the people around him do all the bragging for him. A great way to rewrite the original source material for his character. Now, let's begin with some theories on who Capitano could be. The Bloodstained Knight theory is currently the most popular theory for who Capitano is, and for good reason. Now, fun fact, I was actually supposed to make a video on this theory and my personal take, but I realized that there are some short discrepancies in the lore of both the Fatui and the Bloodstained Knight, so I essentially had to scrap that video. To summarize, the Bloodstained Knight, or the White Knight, was mentored by Rostam, who taught him chivalry and honor above all else. However, as the White Knight began slashing everything and everyone in his way that he deemed vile and monstrous, he became obsessed with delivering justice, to the point he became intrigued and entranced in the feeling of cutting his foes down. For slaughter in the name of justice is justice. It got to the point that the knight slowly became corrupted, where his fair face would become hideous and he'd be forced to wear an iron mask. His corruption is almost to the same degree as Senyora's, who slowly lost herself the more she fought the monsters of the abyss. However, when the Bloodstained Knight found the ruins of Conria, he realized that what happened during the Cataclysm was a true injustice, that the people of Conria were wrongfully turned into monsters. This is still my favorite theory for Capitano because of how raw the story is. I've always loved the story of the Bloodstained Knight, and for it to manifest into a harbinger would be the cherry on top. It would definitely fit into the idea that Capitano is a nigh invincible creature that abides by the rules of justice and honor to an almost barbaric state. And it would justify why he's working with the Fatui Harbingers. He shares the sentiment of the Cataclysm, similar to the Tsaritsa. But this theory is far from perfect. One is that the Bloodstained Knight pledged himself to the Abyss, which is actually oppositional to the Fatui's operations. Contrary to popular belief, the Fatui are supposed to also be fighting against the Abyss. Skirmish's excursions into the Abyss involved him fighting monsters, while La Senyora's artifact from the Pale Flame reinforces her abhorrence of the Abyss. So if Capitano is the Bloodstained Knight, then this would actually mess up their alliances, which cleanly brings me to my next theory, that Capitano is a fraud. This is less of a substantive theory and more so a critical comparison between Capitano the Genshin character and Il Capitano the Commedia dell'Arte character. The core of this argument is that the Il Capitano character was always meant to be someone that isn't what they say they are, and if Genshin chooses to manifest those characteristics into the Harbinger, how would it look like? They always say that if something sounds too good to be true, it probably is. And that thought of a completely honorable higher-up harbinger in an organization where the other higher-ups are either feared or hated or Tartaglia, you just really have to think about who you're trusting. And what if Wanderer's warning about Capitano carries a lot of weight and we shouldn't consider Tartaglia's blind reverence as a good thing? Now, because of how convoluted this theory can be, let's consider the discrepancy from the Bloodstained Knight's lore. The Bloodstained Knight swore allegiance to the Abyss. We'll consider the possibility that Capitano does have ties with the Abyss and that he doesn't. First is that the theory is that the Capitano's true allegiance is with the Abyss as the Bloodstained Knight, not with the Fatui, and that his lying and false nature manifests in the end where he inevitably betrays the Fatui in favor of serving the Abyss's goals. This would only work though if we find evidence of the Bloodstained Knight swearing his oath to the Abyss Order and not just to the Abyss as an entity. The second theory, though, is what if Capitano isn't actually the Bloodstained Knight, but his fraudulence comes in the form of his overall attitude and disposition. The words of righteousness that everyone so highly praises him of is nothing short of a fabrication to make subordinates think they're rooting for someone that actually has a good sense of moral code. Granted, Capitano's strength and battle prowess is definitely not fake, but his code of righteousness could very well be. What motivations the captain has to build this almost perfect reputation is unknown though, but it does fester something important in lower-ranking members. Utmost subordination. The Harbingers are a very political bunch, and they know how to manipulate their subordinates and opponents in efficient ways. Capitano's facade could easily just be his way of keeping his subordinates blindly inspired. Or maybe, on the surface, he is this loyal and righteous fellow, but almost to the point of insanity that nobody questions. Someone that blindly follows their code of honor or openly abhors anyone that goes against the Fatuis. Almost like how Arlecchino does it. Now, both of these theories have a lot of discrepancy, because what if the Bloodstained Knight's allegiance has changed over the course of the lore? We really wouldn't know, but mostly, those are just the claims of the theory. Now, for my take, who do I think Capitano is? While I really like the Bloodstained Knight theory, I also have my own take on who Capitano could be, just from a general point of view. One is that he's a human turned inhuman. This is going to be a contradiction of Varka's claim that Capitano has the courage to challenge gods as an ordinary mortal, which I would think is not completely wrong. I have a sneaking suspicion that Capitano is a human that became inhuman in the process of his life, something like Senora and Dottore. I mentioned in my previous theory about Sandrone that Senora and Dottore are technically humans who got augmented with or without consent. It's very much possible that Capitano is the same way because it would be really difficult for a regular mortal to contest with beings that are literally in the caliber of gods. The Fatui, according to Tartaglia, follow a form of power system, which only complicates things further because if Capitano is nothing short of a regular human, that means he'll have to contest with known powerhouses like Colombina, Scaramouche, Senora, and most of all, the Torre. So I believe that Varka's claim that Capitano is a quote-unquote ordinary mortal is simply because Varka doesn't know any better, and could judge him based on the assumption of there's nothing he could be but a mortal, or maybe he just looks mortal or feels mortal, which honestly wouldn't be a bad assumption. That's the problem with limited lore claims, since Varka really wouldn't have any business knowing who Capitano truly is. Also, this theory does play alongside the Bloodstained Knight theory, but honestly anything goes. Second is that Capitano's role is to represent militaristic strength. Each harbinger plays a fascinating role when running the different divisions, but they also have a specific representation in terms of ideologies that resonate within the Fatui. If Capitano is the first of the harbingers, then his power would, according to Nahida, almost rival that of a god's, a claim that would be further supported by Varka's assessment of him, which, honestly, is why I don't believe that Capitano is completely mortal. Capitano, in my opinion, would be the utmost representation of the Fatui's raw militaristic strength, their ability of conquest and dedication to the Tsaritsa's cause. He would represent the more noble and almost zealous aspects of being a Fatui agent. Contrast this with the Torre, who represents the Fatui's strength and science, and Colombina, who represents the Fatui's divinity over regular mortals. And number 3 is that he's not from Mondstadt. This is going to come out of left field, but a part of me genuinely believes that he's not from Mondstadt, but from somewhere else entirely. While this openly contradicts the Bloodstained Knight theory, I do think that him not being featured in the Mondstadt Archon quest and not having a bigger part to play in it somewhat has merit. But honestly, this is just a personal speculation grounded in absolutely nothing. But don't worry about it. Now for his potential role in Natlan. Capitano's presence in Natlan actually has good parallels with the concept of war. A mysterious knight of the Cryo Archon that embodies both honor and battle would be the perfect candidate to negotiate for the gnosis of a god that not only respects war as a form of conquest, but as a form of tradition. I believe that Capitano's role in Natlan is actually much more cordial than that of the other harbingers, in which he gains the gnosis through proving his might on the battlefield or by winning the Archon's favor over. Now for some notes about discussing Capitano. Unlike my other character analyses, there's actually an underlying problem with discussing Capitano, and it has something to do with his codename, the Captain. Let me give you an example. In the Chasm, the Fatui mentions a captain with a capital C. This captain allegedly lies to the company before they leave the homeland that all they're doing is for the sake of Snezhnaya, but in the end, the captain leaves them to die with no chance of ever returning. Now, I don't remember if this was ever disproven to be Capitano, but I do remember that the captain allegedly perished in the Chasm, or just never returned. Now do you see my problem? The epithet of captain is so common in Genshin lore versus something like the Balladeer, the Damselet, the Knave, or even the Doctor. There are so many characters in the lore that are known as captains with a capital C. Beidou, Albedo, Kaya, and Eula are each known as captains of various degrees, which is fascinating but overall difficult, which is why I generally warn people when theorizing about Capitano. When we see captain with a capital C, think of what kind of context is being presented because we might get another character altogether. But that's it for me today. Capitano for me is such a fascinating character because on one hand we know absolutely nothing about him, and on the other, his inspiration is meant to be someone of a liar and a braggart, which makes me think that this kind of representation of him as being this righteous and noble person is nothing short of a facade. But nevertheless, my name is Aster, and who do you think Capitano could be? Could Capitano just be a whole new character altogether, or do you think he's a Bloodstained Knight? But yes, that's it for me today. My name is Aster, and thank you for chilling with me.